Assalamualaikum to Mishikin. So today our group will be presenting the title, which is Sexual Education in Malaysia, is it acceptable or rejected? And this will be presented by me, Marshatika binti Jair, Aris Daniel, and Nurhaliza binti Jongok.
So for the first slide is for the article information, which is the title is the sexual education in Malaysia, whether it is accepted or rejected. So on this slide it stated the title, the link, the author for this article, and also the date of publish, which is on 2012 for the article. So for the introduction for this article, which is the sexual education in Malaysia, whether it is accepted or rejected. So the Malaysian government had taken the approaches and implementation to introduce the sex education in school in order to minimize and curb the sexual related social problems that occur among Malaysian teens nowadays. So this article that we review is related to the aim to determine the rate of acceptance among adolescents on implementations of sexual education in schools. So the outcome shows that some perceptions and thoughts about the sexual education among the teens, and most of the respondents, which is mostly parents, response shows positive results with the idea that is given by the government. So it shows that the implementations of sexual education among the teens are accepted well by the adolescents presently.
Okay, so for the first article is sexual education in Malaysia, is it accepted or rejected? In general, the data show that almost 49.3% of the respondents agree that the implementation of sexual education is one of the most effective methods to reduce social problems, and this is supported by the acceptance rate that this module will help reduce social illness, which show 47.4%. And according to this article, the response pattern towards the suggested appropriate age to introduce sexual education show an descending rate of agreement, with 70.3% agree to introduce it to upper secondary school students, followed by 48.7% agree to disclose this module to lower secondary students, and finally at 18.4% of participants agree to start sexual education as early as primary school. However, some people may say that sexual education this is against their moral or religious belief and sentiments as an individual. There is nothing about comprehensive sexual education that prevents parents from teaching their children about their moral behavior. And a large number of schools do not teach because it becomes difficult to argue with people as they lead the faith forward and trust prefer to resolve the sensitive issue untouched. However, I agree with this article that using sex education is one of the effective ways to reduce social problems such as rape. Rape cases among minor and school students in Malaysia is an important knowledge about additional sex education with free association with other friends to know the partner through social sites such as Facebook, WhatsApp, WeChat, and so on. The example of the table above us can see the increase in rape cases every year. Where it is on a 2007 study published in the American Journal of Public Health is found that teens who started using condoms since they first had sex got higher score on some sexual health measure than teens who didn't. Scientists followed more than 4,000 teenagers for nearly 7 years. They found that teens who used condom on their first intercourse had the same number of sexual partners as those who did not. Also, there were 30% more likely to use condom during their most recent sexual experience. They are also only have a likely to be infected with chlamydia and gonorrhea. With that, Malaysia can take this as a guide if it wants to address the social problem that are happening. Looking at the reliability of the evidence and research done on this topic, it is safe to say that sex education in school is highly encouraged. However, it should be tested whether abstinence of comprehensive sex education work better for students. Results collected from selected schools will only be analyzed and implemented to the school. Not only that, parents should also be encouraged to meet with responsible educators so that they can find out the content of sex education and discuss more easily about sex with their teens. So we're moving on to the second article, which is analysis of sex education in formal or informal across Malaysia. According to the article explained about sexual education held in school in Malaysia, overall 95% of respondents showed that sex education was not held in school formally. This statement was given after they were exposed to the sex education curriculum proposed by UNESCO. However, after a thorough examination of respondent script, it was found that 85% who were 300 to 23 respondents reported that sexual education was held in school but only in a limited and unclear manner. 10% who were 38 respondents that started that sexual education was. Sex education statement not held in school. Sex education statement held in school in a which number. Sex education statement held through science and biology class. Sex education also through fiqh and Islamic studies. Explanatory statement, agreement statement, and on sex education held in school in Malaysia, and proposal to improve teaching on sex education in the classroom. In the school system, sex education is limited and some are lacking, although there are concerns about the appropriateness of sex education in school and some teachers are uncomfortable teaching it. Many people fear sex education with the true that is promote sexual activity, not knowing that sex education is not based on the purpose or sexual action itself, therefore inducing sexual activity, but possible consequences that may be due to a misunderstanding of the sex. Besides that, sex education can help solve some of those consequences or the problem and issue of adolescence that we face today, especially in Malaysia. Of formal sex education, especially in the school system, is due to many factors such as conflict, religious or conservative view, fear that comprehensive sex education encourages children to experiment in sexual activity, and concern about priorityness of sex education. So, in formal way, parents play the role. They just give information, a basic information to their children, especially to their daughter. Sex education can be beneficial for both parents and child. Although abstinence-only program can be effective, comprehensive sex education has been proven to be much more successful. Therefore, sex education can be studied formally in school like other subjects as well as additional subjects.
So next is the parent attitude towards inclusion of sexuality in sexuality education in Malaysia school, whether the children should be taught or not. So in this statement, it discuss about the sex education in Malaysia school, where the sex education are one of the sensitive issue in Malaysia. That some of the parents may talk about the sexual education, which they will think that this education will have a bad influence on the minds of their children. So just like the Malaysian society, so they are still conservative, a conservative country like Malaysia, where most of the parents are quite religious people that care about the education that they want to apply in their children education system, especially uh, sexual education that are quite sensitive to them. So the majority of these are from the Muslim country, where the sexual education is prohibited from being taught in school because it's a very sensitive issue to be expressed in the school education. Parents that are majority they are Muslims, they are also not very fond to the this kind of education system, just as they claim that the sexual education it has a bad influence on their children. They claim that sexual education is an immortal education that touch the sexual matters that are not very appropriate for the age of their children. And from this statement, I can give a critique on it. From the perspective, it's a sensitive issue in education, especially in Malaysia, which is an Islamic country. So this group of parents are also most of them Muslim, and they agree with the country attitude toward the sexual education system that they don't want to introduce to school to their children. But through this statement, it should also be noted that the lack of sexual education exposure to the children will give a negative impact to the most of the parents. The most of the parents, the parents that old fashioned, that most of them are 40 years old, 50 years old, that they are still conservative. Their minds are not fully open minded towards this issue. So they are still looked down on the sexual education, which is are not value. They are think that this sexual education are not valuable to their children. But instead, this sexual education is very important to apply in the life of their childrens. The lack of exposure will make the student do not know how to protect themselves from sexual predators, reckless conduct, and also STD, which is the sexual transmitted disease. And this is caused because of the lack adequate information about the sexual education in public schools. So in this research, so the initiative of sex education in school are strongly supported by many parents who are open-minded through it. Maybe there are some parents that are disagreeing on this debate where they are not very comfortable with the new things such as sexual education that are represent in their children system education system. But nowadays it has changed a lot in the line of the world, the modern world today, where most of the parents are in their 30s, are more open-minded to this sexual education uh, that that are need to be exposed to the younger generation in order to think to be curb like the increase of diseases like AIDS or HIV. So the fourth article, which is titled Malaysia Sexuality Education Multimedia Courseware, will it be a solution teaching sexuality subject matters in schools? So in this statement, they are discussed about the multimedia software of Malaysia sexuality education, where it can be a solution in teaching sexuality in schools, where they are still wonder whether through this multimedia Malaysia sexuality education that can be taught in the school, where it can be a tool to be used in as a teaching material of sexual education. So through this statement, they are discuss about the social problem that faced by the adolescents today, especially school children, where they have lack of education, especially sexual education, and this is because of the issue of the sexual education is such a taboo to discuss because of the sentiments of the people that they are so sensitive. So the lack of sexual education among children had adverse effects such as the increase in criminal cases such as the rape and misconduct action that often occur among adolescents and children. So this will cause increase in cases of HIV or AIDS infection that occur not due to drugs, but most of them due to the increase in these diseases by the free associations of youngest generation and unprotected sex practice by adolescents. Malaysia sexual education, they expect to curb the problem that's faced by adolescents that related to sexual problem. So the objective are to review the advantage and disadvantage from and develop the appropriate learning module that are given to students to design and developing the sexual education courseware that are based on animation as well as they evaluating the use of prototypes in achieving their object to address the problem related to the sexual among students. But from my perspective, um, this procedure to be done are quite really difficult and quite really difficult to adapt in the education system in Malaysia. That I'm very concerned about the outcomes of Malaysia's sexuality education, which that are based on the multimedia. It might not seem very encouraging for a student and a teachers, and this procedure are also very complicated to understand that it has go through several phases in ensuring it is successful in developing or delivering the sexual education to student. The approach of using interactive through computers and humans make users somewhat unfamiliar with this modern way in education term, especially to teachers. Through this statement that the effort that developed by the government are very much smart, and I really agreed for it to be developed, which it introduce and provide awareness uh, awareness about the sexual education to adolescents. So from this effort, uh, the study have found that most of the students understand the sexual education better through their teachers than their own parents. So here Malaysia sexuality education multimedia has achieved the actual objective in linking understanding between the student and also the teachers to deliver the sexual education in a positive and easy understand way. So from this statement, it's quite difficult for me to find some criticism over it because of the effectiveness that they implement, which turned out to be really successful by providing an understanding to the youngest generation. And impressively, it was more easily to be understand by the use of the computer, the communication between the teachers and the student by using the computer communication as their approach, as well as the use of the animation in delivering a learning output to the youngsters. Okay, thank you, and that's all.
And for the conclusions for these articles, in conclusion, the sex education is a lifelong process of gaining information about the sexual development, affection, intimacies, interpersonal relationship, and reproductive health So as Malaysian country is still considered as a developing country that moves forward to modernize lifestyles and mindset, many parents are still in the conservative perspective. Nevertheless, many parents nowadays also do agree to include these sex educations in schools as to protect and let their children know and gain reliable information and knowledge about the positive and negative sides of sex in lives.